Welcome to the Biltmore Church Podcast. Our church exists to glorify God by making disciples of Jesus who reach up, reach in, and reach out. And this podcast is a resource that's hopefully going to help you do just that. We're already in week 2 of our new teaching series that we're calling Family Circus, where we're talking a lot about how does the Bible and how does the gospel intersect with the family. And there's so many different ways we can go with that. It's been awesome so far. And this past week, we talked about marriage, and so I'm so excited to jump on the podcast today with both of you. I'm here, by the way, I should do the introductions. My name is Christian. I serve on staff here, and I have the privilege of being here today with our lead pastor, Bruce Frank, and also Miss Lori Frank.
First Lady.
Christian,
That's
so
right.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you back. I can't remember when the last time was. I think it was when we were talking about marriage in last year. So I'm really grateful to have another conversation with both of y'all today. Looking forward to that. So before we jump into a lot of different questions that I've got kind of structured and laid out, I would love to just kick off by talking about last Sunday. I mentioned a second ago, week 2 of our series, and Pastor, you did a great job of preaching on marriage, husbands, wives. There's so many different ways to go with that. So I'd love to start with just some Sunday recap, maybe what stood out to both of you from last weekend.
What stood out to me was a negative wind chill factor. That is what stood out to me is -5 on the wind chill. No, but ladies first.
I've just been dwelling on the quote that he made that I think really just kind of is soothing and challenging at the same time when he said, a Christian marriage is not trying to recreate some image of a 1950s sitcom ideal. We're trying to image Christ and his church in the world. It is the gospel on display. So that's really the whole sermon right there.
Yeah, I mean, again, I always learn. Normally, the teacher always learns more than anything that he or she can say. And certainly, I did that. I mean, a bunch of stuff stands out about how can I be a better head. How can I serve? How can I put, her needs? And then, also, honestly, when you preach a message like that, doing a pastor deal for a long time, you either know firsthand or you hear secondhand or just the deep scar tissue that's in the room. So there's kind of a heaviness, even though you try to interject a little levity at times.
Right.
There is a lot of either somebody's, either through the pain of divorce or, whether somebody, that like somebody showed up and their spouse wouldn't come, or just a lot of, again, it kind of is the whole series is there's no joy like family joy and there's no pain like family pain, and marriage certainly is at the front end of that.
Yeah.
I will say one other thing. It was a good reminder, and I've said it before, but I hadn't thought about it in a while, that right after the wedding in Genesis 2, the war starts in Genesis 3. And that the wedding to a war, I kept thinking about that, and that's like the target. That's the target, and the ripple effects that come from that. If he can destroy the marriage, the ripple effects from the kids to the extended family to the church, all of that, if he can get that, foothold in there and basically destroy the marriage, then it has a lot of concentric circles.
Yeah, super important.
Absolutely.
So with that, we're going to jump into some discussion today, talking even more about marriage. Maybe dig into a little bit some of the personal side of your own marriage. You guys are both deep wells of wisdom when it comes to that. Also what the Bible has to say about marriage, and hopefully we can just kind of see where the discussion takes us today. But first, I wanted to just ask maybe how has Scripture informed the way that all believers should, quote unquote, do marriage? And how is that countercultural from the way that the world does marriage? I know we talked about this a little bit on Sunday, but
Sure. You good? You want me to go? You go.
Take off. Yeah.
I mean, you could almost not make it any more different. I mean, there's an occasional intersection, and it depends on culture-wise, but if the question is, how do you do marriage? We even saw Sunday, there is so much, even in the text we looked at, there's 2 ditches that, depending on what you want to define as culture, because we have subcultures within the bigger culture, but so culture in general in the West and in some degree in the world, especially in, Europe and the U.S., looks at verses and passages like this, really any that teaching on marriage, from Jesus in Matthew 19 to the epistles, even to the Genesis narrative, and they basically these are the passages that they do to diss the Bible. Like that is prehistoric, that's abusive, that is all that. And the reason they can do that is, number one, it doesn't make sense without the gospel protection, if you will. But even in a second sense, it's very easy to see bad examples from that. On the other hand, I think the other ditch is the Christian culture or the Christian subculture of people who go beyond what the Bible says. So they'll take their little passages, let's take the word submission, and they'll like completely ignore the Proverbs 31, or they'll completely ignore certain things, and they'll look at it as almost the opposite of what the Scripture is teaching. But they'll over apply, somewhat like when we talk about the Sabbath here in later on in the series, almost how the rabbis they put rules and rules and rules and rules and rules, and then Jesus had to remind us, listen, the Sabbath was given as a gift to man. Man's not made for the Sabbath. But what was interesting, and as the rabbis put that on there, that was called their yoke. And then so what did Jesus do? Jesus comes along and said, listen, my yoke is totally different. I mean, it is the word, but I'm not putting extra baggage. And I just think that's what, to some degree, in churches like ours who are extremely serious about the Bible, that is the tendency you have to fight against. On one hand, it's liberalism, getting away from it, and that's in the church culture. Mainline churches have gone away from this and said it's all then, not now. And then sometimes churches that are more serious about the Bible, they over apply, and to Lori's point, try to sanctify the 1950s and Father Knows Best, not realizing that, listen, that's just as much a part of the fall as well. I mean, so let's go, really you've got to go back to Genesis 2 in the principles if you're trying to look at pre-fall, but all of it's distorted. So the question is, how do you get back closer and closer to that original narrative?
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of, really how Jesus taught, which is, you have heard it said blank, but I say to you, and what it seems like you're trying to do is say, hey, you've heard it applied this way, and you've heard it applied this way. What does it actually mean in the greater context? Which seems to help people a lot. Just from early feedback from Sunday. So.
Well, and always the rules of Bible study. So what does it mean then? What does it mean? What did it mean then? What did it mean in Rome in 60 AD or whatever? What does it now mean? What does it mean now? And then what does it mean to me personally? And I think even people who take the Bible seriously flip it a little bit, and they're like, "This is good." And so I was trying to make the point. This is going to look a little different in different. Her and I heck, it looks different than now than it did 15 years ago, as far as the ebb and flow learning, because really, if you take verse 21, mutual submission, submission just means order. It's a military term, order. And so really you can make a very strong case that 22 all the way is verse 22 to 24. This is how this looks for a wife to mutually submit, and it uses the word again. But you can make a point that 25 to 31 is the order in which a male is supposed to do, a husband is supposed to do by sacrificially loving. So, and everybody has a tendency to look at the other person and say, get your hey, I'm going to quote your verses to you versus looking at your own verses. That's just the natural
the log
tendency.
In the eye.
We always, everybody fights it.
Yeah. I'd be curious to hear your perspective as well.
Well, there's so much hope in that concept of, on an individual basis, there's just a wide field. But his point was, there is a fence. At some point, there has to be a fence that, as when we juxtapose it toward the culture, and on the cover of Time magazine this very week is a whole piece on normalizing polyamory. And so God is saying, okay, here is how I've planned it. Here's how I've designed it so that you flourish, so everybody wins. And then the culture or the heart of mankind is wanting to just push past that fence and say, well, does it really have to be a man and a woman? Does it have to be for life? Does it have to be just two people? And, there's something inside of us that wants to push all the time. So, yes, it's wide open for an individual couple to figure out what that looks like, but within the fence that God has placed for our protection.
And it's not an accident, to Lori's point about culture pushing against it. And then you look at Ephesians 5, for example, and the marriage is supposed to picture the gospel, and the gospel pictures marriage. And so if you want to push away from the gospel, then the culture's going to push against marriage. That, no, we're going to, and the point at the start is, listen, God designed it to flourish. He's the one, doesn't matter what the Supreme Court says in regards to the definition of it. God defined it. He defined it for our good, for our flourishing. So anyway, there's a lot of stuff, but hopefully I learned a lot. I'm still thinking about the ways I need to kind of reapply as well, reassert myself toward those ends.
Yeah. Always learning and growing.
Hopes you need to.
Yeah.
Need to.
So with that, all of that in mind, what are some of the key lessons you've both learned when it comes to building a godly marriage?
We don't have time. At least
a 4-hour podcast, maybe.
Well, I mean, we've had, we've been married for over 3 decades. And so we've definitely had different seasons. We've had people speaking to us at tough, difficult times. I'm not trying to say anything I haven't said before, but I mean, I married well. I married a lady who was she was very grounded spiritually, and has grown from that. And so, myself and the boys, we reaped the benefits from things that we did not sow into. But in other words, that I got to marry a young Proverbs 31, because I'd be 22. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was 22 years old when we got married. Now I just turned 25. So we were pups, but we came from different sides of the tracks spiritually. She had a foundation that was put into her spiritually. All that. I was pretty new to the faith, even when we got married. I was in seminary, so I was a 5-year-old Christian at the time, and she just knew a lot more than I did. Saw it mimicked in mostly really positive ways. So I had a lot of catch up to do in regards to that. And then the second one is I was, by makeup and upbringing, super independent. And still have to fight against that, independent in the sense that, that's what I grew up with. Early on, and then had a single mom, raising 4 boys. So it was kind of like you just kind of scrap and make do, and that leads to some strengths, and it also leads to some weaknesses. So we've worked through those to some degree. We still are always working through them, but always.
Yeah. One thing that has fed into my personal health is his acknowledgement that although there is headship and submission that is assumed in Scripture, but also the mutual submission, we are equally yoked. We have equal plow-pulling capacity for the Lord. And he has always seen our marriage as a full partnership. Just fleshed out differently, and that has allowed me to mature and grow. The marriage lessons that I was raised on are not the marriage lessons I would teach.
Interesting.
I was very much from a little bit of a legalistic standpoint of you need to have a hot meal on the table, and it's all up to you. He needs to come in and get in his recliner and pull open the paper, and you better have those kids' faces washed and ready to be quiet.
Right.
And that is how you wife, according to how I was raised. And I've found out that is such a drop in the bucket of the glories of what God has for us as a couple. It's great. I figure it's the least I could do to cook dinner if he's worked all day.
She did that awesome as well, by the way. She did that awesome. Yeah.
That's not why God put me on this earth. I have a calling and a purpose that is every bit as God-given as his is. Yeah. And so he's always just tried to help me come out of that and find my ministry legs and find my mothering legs and my own personal pursuits with my nursing career and that kind of thing. So, but as far as the lesson I've learned about marriage, just for me and my own personal flaws, is that God knows best. That see to it that you respect your husband. I've noticed that when I come at him, even if it's a legitimate need I'm bringing him, if I come without respect, if I come with disrespect, he's either going to fight or flight or freeze. And I don't want him running away. Yeah. I don't want him coming right back at me because he is a very good fighter and a good
verbally
a good arguer
for clarity.
And I can never
at least with you,
because he's so good at it, and I don't want him to freeze either. So I think I have to just remember that the Proverbs say a wise woman builds her house and a foolish one tears it down with her own hands. So I'm always, everything I bring to the marriage is either building up or tearing down. And, you know, I said we were equally yoked. We've plowed in circles. We've gotten stuck in the mud.
As any
one
marriage
person's
will.
rowing, one
as
person's
any marriage
rowing.
will. I mean, as any marriage will.
But actually, our kids taught us this in their marriage. We observed that if they're kind of pulling against each other in the yoke, they have to. One of them has to stop and say, "Same team."
Yeah.
Right.
So that we're attacking the problem and not attacking each other. And boy, is that a hard one to learn. But
for sure. Yeah, and sometimes people get in ruts, and we've had people, I think it was on our 5-year sabbatical from here. I mean, the first week or whatever one of those weeks, I mean, we got some marriage enrichment people that speak into us and focused in on that. And we've learned lessons from that still, you know, bear fruit. But the whole point is, I mean, there is no perfect marriage. You got two sinners living under a household, and you're going to have conflict. We'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. I'm just saying but you got to feel, you know, how do you attack the issues? But again, it's a daily deal. I mean, it's some days the butterflies are there and it's happy, and everybody wants that. I mean, who doesn't wake up going, "Come on, happy"? We want happy. But sometimes that's not the day that it brings. But the covenant that we made back in Fort Worth, Texas, you know, on August the 19th is, I mean, that's the covenant, and then everything flourishes from that. But I go back, and we've had a number of seasons, but to watch her flourish, and I think, you know, one of the cool things, I think just that she has more confidence, I think, than when we got married. You know, when we got married, young 22-year-old, and to watch the way God's grown her in confidence, which I think you're trying to do as a husband. I think when you look at those Ephesians passages that you would nourish, and I can't remember the verbs right now, but it's the idea of how do you nourish. It's been fun because I've hurt that process before too. I mean, I've hurt the process enough times, but you know, but in spite of that, to watch them, like looking at that plant over there, and I just remember an illustration from decades ago. He was a guy named Gary Smalley. He took I think that's a fake plant, but I think he had a real plant.
Yeah.
And, you know, he was like, you're going to marry as you're a husbandman, which means a gardener. And the tendency when you marry is you think that tree has all green leaves, just like that one does. But there's no, you know, but there are times that are brown that you didn't see in the dating process. And if you're not careful, and I certainly did this early on particularly, is get frustrated at those and think I didn't do anything why am I paying for that? And realize that your job is to try to create an environment, whatever, you know, what are the needs to help that flourish and that brown leaf to become green. The tendency for any young husband, and even a lot of husbands now, is just get frustrated, pick it off, you know, get angry with it. Think let me go look for another green leaf. There's got to be a tree out there that has no brown leaves.
Yeah.
You don't even know that, hey, she married somebody with a lot of brown leaves.
Got plenty of brown leaves.
I got plenty of brown leaves as well. So,
What's up, everyone? Pressing pause on our discussion real quick to tell you about a cool resource to help you in your walk with Jesus. You know, as we follow Jesus, we all need community around us to help us along the way. We believe life change happens in the context of relationships. Jesus taught that his followers are part of a new family, the family of God. And with that in mind, we have an easy way to get involved in a group. We actually call it the Group Finder. So you can go to biltmorechurch.com/groups and click the Find a Group button. And you're gonna be able to scroll through every group that we have. You can use different filters to find the one that fits best for you. And you can even contact the group leader directly for more information. So if you're not involved in a group yet, I cannot encourage you enough to give it a try. Don't underestimate the power of community in your walk with Jesus. Now back to the conversation. So what would be some rhythms or habits or whatever word you want to use that you may recommend to people who are listening, watching, and they want to strengthen their marriage? I mean, some of that may be seasonal depending on what age you are, but what would be some ideas?
I think it's definitely seasonal, but it has to be intentional. And that intentionality is going to choose the season. Like when there's times in our marriage where she was working as a nurse, doing night shift, we had newborns, and so you're scrapping to find any kind of time. Even then, you got to just try to be intentional. How do you, the time, I remember early, we were living in Blue Grove, Texas, in a parsonage right in front of a Sudan field.
The big city. With
scorpions crawling on the carpet. I think I was probably, I can't remember what I was, it was a great, great first church. But I literally probably was making $14,000 a year.
Right.
We got free gas, though, because it was right out in front. We got free gas. So that is going to be different. But at the same time, she'd be driving to Henrietta to work the night shift. And so we were like passing each other, coming and going. But even then, and then you get to the carpool stage, and then you get to the empty nest stage. So everyone's different. And I think she can speak to the, we did something about 8 or 9 years ago. I can't remember when we started it. I think it's made a real positive impact. It was that I'll mention this week as we look at rhythms and stuff, but about just kind of Sabbathing.
I'm married to a very hard worker. Mm-hmm. And as you know, ministry is absolutely absorbing. Mm-hmm. And I think we had gotten to a place, we had launched our kids off to college, and we were in a place where we had become a very good family management partnership, but the intimacy was suffering. I felt like we were, even though we probably spent more minutes together, we just weren't connecting in a way that I felt a 30-year-old marriage should be. And so we made a mutual act of repentance to say, we will Sabbath together. And I'm glad he's going to cover that, because I think those Sabbath rhythms are designed for our good.
Yeah, for sure.
And so, I expressed to him a need that I had, that was, I need to know to some degree of how well it's in your control that you're going to be home at 6:30 every night. I need a time. If it's 7, if it's whatever. I'm tired of reheating dinner or working hard on dinner and you're not here, or you sit in the garage and finish phone calls for an hour while I'm
hypothetically
waiting.
Yeah.
and I felt like that was a reasonable thing to ask, but it is a discipline that he does out of love for me, because honestly, he could work till 10 o'clock every night and it'd never be done, right? So that, to me, just spoke so much love over me, was that I will call a stopping point and go home and switch gears and become the lover I'm supposed to be. And we started having a 24-hour period each week where we would do something fun and restorative. We'd eat some good food. We'd take a nap, watch some football, go to a movie, and having a whole 24-hour period, just jet fuel for my soul. Just jet fuel for my soul. And it's been so good for us. So it's great that we've agreed on that.
Yep.
So what would you say, from both perspectives? We talked a lot about love and respect on Sunday. Some common things that you've seen that tend to pull the rug out from underneath your spouse. And you can say that personally, or maybe from just things you've seen in other couples.
Well, I'm a terrible counselor, so I tell people, I'm like, listen, if you want to know what I can tell you about marriage or whatever, listen to the sermons, because that's all I got. But I would say what I talked about, and I say this as a contrast, because I honestly cannot ever think of a time where, especially publicly, we've had intense, disagreements, but even I cannot remember a time where she has ever publicly, I can't remember feeling disrespected publicly. That is in contrast to, I cannot tell you how many times, not even on purpose. I don't think it's on purpose, but those illustrations I used Sunday, those were not, I didn't have to look those up in a book. Those are right there. I've seen where, because the point is that men don't typically fight with words. I mean, if you think about it this way, you're growing up. I mean, if you're guys can. If I'm at odds with a guy, especially growing up, I mean, you might go scrap behind the schoolyard, but you were probably friends by Friday. I mean, you literally, physically,
Right.
you worked it out. I would just notice even the way ladies are more verbal, more precise, and even the way they fight with each other. Not trying to be, I'm just saying they can, man. But sometimes that overflows. I've just seen where ladies pull the rug out to their husbands verbally by, that's why I said you got to be careful of teasing and sarcasm. Because, again, we're asking, how do I measure up? And when that teasing comes in like, man, I wish you could fix a sink like, Susie's husband. Or I wish you could, again, I'm just thinking of one. I was sitting there, I'd just gotten back from an elk hunt and saw some friends of ours. And then she inadvertently said, man, I wish he could, kill an animal and, fill the freezer. Because we're in trouble if the zombies attack or something like that. And I could see him cringe. Because I'm like, hey, you didn't grow up with that. I mean, you either grow up with it or you learn it, but it's not like you. So I would say, again, the public way, how do you talk to your friends about your husband? I've seen that, and to Lori's point, I hadn't heard the 3 Fs before. Was it a flee, fight, or freeze?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wish I'd have known that. I would have used that Sunday. That's like perfect. But I would say what you do, when I see that, the husband, he should push through it, but 90% of the time, if he feels incompetent, he's going to be a little embarrassed and he's going to withdraw, and he's going to get passive, or, I mean, it's a little wound to the soul. So,
And those add up.
they do add up, and a guy will hold it in and hold it in.
Well, the point you made on Sunday, where you said to the original hearers of the teaching in Ephesians, the shocking part was not women submit to their husbands. The shocking part was the way the husband was to love.
For sure.
And I think the modern woman, I don't consider myself a modern woman, but I have relationships with some young wives, and they see that submission part, and something wells up in them because they know what they bring to the table. They know the assets they have to offer to the family. Often, because women mature faster, the wife is a little bit more relationally stable than the husband is at that point, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
And so they think, why did God pick him to lead? And Eve was susceptible to temptation because of her desire to control. And that's always going to be in our hearts. So the way I would counsel a wife who sincerely wants to build up her husband is to picture the conversation that this man had with God before he chose you, where God says, hey, I made you a woman. And he's like, oh, cool. I'm excited you made me a woman. And he said, and guess what? I'm going to let you be the head of her. And he's like, oh, this just gets better and better and better. And then God says, but you, man, are going to be personally accountable to me, God of the universe, for how well you lead, provide, and protect. Whether she is a fruitful vine in your household, you and me are going to deal with that. By hook or by crook, we're going to get it handled. And then he says, and just so you know, your evaluation criteria is Jesus. Oh, so the mere fact that this young man, with marriage ages rising and marriage rates tanking, that this man was like, oh, sure, I'll carry the ring to Mordor. What else you want from me, Lord? He stepped up and he said, I'll do it. And faltering though his steps may be, that alone is worthy of respect. And you can give that to him by the energy that you bring into the relationship, that is an energy of, I respect you because you show up. You're here. You said yes to headship, and every little effort, if you affirm it and receive it into your heart through faith, then God is going to bless that, and He will hold that man accountable. He doesn't need you to get involved in that. Let God handle him, because Jesus is the standard, and that's the way every woman wants to be loved.
And I want to say how men also pull the rug out as well. We both talked about how women do. There's ways that men do, but there's two quotes from some friends of ours. One of them, I think, is Tony Evans. He said submission is when a woman ducks so God can hit the man. So in other words, it's like, listen, you just duck, let God take care of it, just let God hit the man. And then, what was my other one? It was a Jobyism, and I can't even remember what it was. But as far as the way that I think that men pull the rug out is, I know she mentioned it, when we started doing the Sabbath thing and trying to protect it. And it's not that you can do it 100% every time. You get an emergency, whatever, something happens. But generally speaking, it is at least communicating priority. I think that's the point, is communicating priority. You know, you get down to it, it's like the best marriages are based off friendship. I mean, if you look at the Hebrew word, I think it's alep, I think is one of the words in the Song of Solomon, and that means friendship. And it's like, in other words, you know what, I want to not just spend time with you, I want to help you be the best you can be. I mean, think about the friends that you hang around. They basically bring out the best in you. I mean, your friends, you don't hang around people that bring out the worst in you, or if you do,
you shouldn't.
That's immaturity.
Yeah. I mean, actually, I guess people do, but the point is, I want to make, how do I make sure she feels like that she is more? I mean, let me just use an easy example. Especially at certain times, I mean, I spent time trying to get really good at golf, and it can obsess you, whether it be golf or hunting or whatever. And I hear guys that go like, man, my wife doesn't want me to ever hunt. She doesn't ever want me to play golf. She doesn't ever want me to do whatever your hobby is. And I think the deal for us, there stopped to be the tension when, really the tension went away when the Sabbath was protected for the most part. It's like, you know what, you have prioritized this. Hopefully it was communicating, again, honor and respect, which, husbands live with their wives in an honorable way. I think that was like, you're valuable. That was a tangible expression of value.
Every woman is born with a cavernous cave of, like you said, asking the question, am I worthy of love, to be fully known and still fully loved? And, little girls are looking for that in the eyes of their father. And then subsequently in the eyes of the man that they have said I do to. And it's funny how that bucket can stay full, and then it can drain, and it can be filled up again. And it's never too late to start pouring the answer to that question into your wife's heart, whatever that looks like for her. Every woman wants to be cherished. Every woman wants to have confidence in and feel secure in this man who knows me better than anyone on earth still loves me, and he shows me every day. And that takes a lifetime. You're never done, but it works. Yeah.
And to go back to that, where guys are like, man, my wife doesn't want, that's the old ball and chain, I can't do all that kind of stuff. Typically it's because over time the bucket it's empty, and maybe if it's been empty a long, long time, it's going to take a little time to fill up. If it's just
fix the hole,
you got to fix the hole, and then you got to fill up. But I'm saying, and so I would challenge the guys. What's that bucket looking like? And if you're going to be the head, which implies leadership, be the lead apologizer, be the lead repenter. We're not good at some stuff, but typically, if you're like, hey, make it your I want to make something, I want to build something. Well, just what do I need to do to build back into that? And for us, I think one of the good ones, there's been a number of demarcation points, but one of them was that, whatever that was, 6 or 7 years ago, when we started saying, barring some weird emergency, We're going to try to protect this 24 hours. Try to not get on this. Don't look at this at the phone, at the restaurant if you can't help it, those kind of things, which just implies value.
And it doesn't have to be formal. I mean, half the time we go to the gym.
And I'm married to an awesome person who likes to watch football as well. So, I mean, that can be, and I would say that guys do, and for ladies, they just need to understand guys do see watching a football game as quality time, shared friendship. On the other hand, I think guys need to understand, it does say something if I make a reservation at a restaurant instead of just like, hey, where?
Yeah.
And again, you always got to fight the tendency to be passive. Even aggressive guys, I'm a pretty aggressive guy. I fight passivity in our marriage. And if I'm not careful, I fall right back into the habits that, you thought were broken. But, hey, you just go back to them sometime.
Hey, my name's Skyler. I serve with the student team here at the Arden campus, and I've been here for about 8 months now on staff, and grew up in a small town in North Georgia where everybody knows everybody. Everybody went to church on Wednesdays and Sundays, and for a lot of time, like kind of early middle school, going into high school, I had that mindset of that, I went to church on Sundays, went to church on Wednesdays, did all the right things, and because I did that, God and I were good. And it wasn't until I was starting to go into high school that I realized that my walk with Jesus isn't about me doing the right things. It's actually, like God's word says, it's filthy rags. And it's actually the fact that Jesus came and paid the debt of my sins that I could never pay by going to church enough, by tithing enough, by helping with worship enough. Rather, it was through the work that Jesus did that I find a relationship with God. And it's a verse that I go to often with anytime I share my testimony is Galatians 2:20. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives within me. And the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself up for me. And now on this side of salvation and walking through sanctification, I'm seeing that the Lord has been faithful through many family crisis, through moving, through marriage, that he has truly been working everything out, not for how I necessarily plan it, but for my good and ultimately for his glory.
So, John 15, Jesus says, apart from me, you can do nothing. The older I get, the more that verse means.
I cannot believe you just said
older. I didn't say old.
The older I get. Christian.
But with that in mind, how has prayer played a role in your own marriage?
A demarcation, I mean, again, I'm not trying to just totally say, I mean, I've told this story before, I don't want to embarrass her, but a specific prayer time that as a demarcation point was back in Houston before we even moved here, where she did a 40-day fast. And started off, if you've ever done a fast, you start off with an objective or something like that. And I think it was one of our boys. And then after a few days, God begins to chip away at you. And I mean, this girl did a 40-day fast and was consuming everything, Puritan writers, scripture, Baba, just whatever. And she just took off in her walk with Jesus. I mean, just smoked us, just went on. And and I said earlier, we're the byproduct to some degree. We got to enjoy the fruits of what God did with her through an intense prayer time. So I'm going to look back at that, and I can't remember that's probably 20 years ago by now.
At least.
Yeah. And so that's a specific one. And there's other times, just like what we did, like this this morning. It was like, pray that the grandchild would not throw a hissy fit when she came up here for a podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm better at praying for her and oftentimes get passive about praying with her. And so that was good reminders even for me Sunday. It's like, don't make it harder than it needs to be. So anyway, those are just a handful of things.
I think like you said, the individual prayer life, the breathing of the Holy Spirit's power, because it really is impossible apart from His grace. I don't know how anyone stays married without the Lord. And so, but you have to do your own soul work. You have to care for your own soul. That's part of Christian maturity, is learning to feed yourself, but also learning to be living dependent. And that takes communication with the Lord. And as He pulls you along and grows you, you just have to minute by minute figure that out. And that moment in my life, what I was feeling was time slipping away. My kids are at a pivotal moment in their upbringing, our marriage, our careers. I just felt like everything was spinning and nothing was grounded. And the Lord just took me back to that moment and stripped me down and built me back up. And that's happened, maybe not quite so dramatically, over and over through 35 years of life. He's broken us and rebuilt us and broken us and rebuilt us in His image. And that's what's the promise of He who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. Man, we're hanging on to that for dear life, because we want to finish well. We want to finish strong, more in love than ever. We know we can accomplish more together than apart. So we're going to need to be dependent.
And there's been various times, whether it be a formal family altar, whether it be, as I joked, driving to Florida, having quizzes and, on preachers' kids. So preachers have a little bit different rhythm, but like right now, she teaches a large ladies class. And they go over the text that I'm gonna cover. And so what happens organically is we might talk about, like this past week, we can sit there and just begin to discuss the Ephesians 5, or hey, did you read this guy, or that kind of. So for us, there's kind of a built-in rhythm. I think Tyler actually said it last week, kind of cool, about how the values are inherited in the rhythms if you're of a PK, and just the ministry life has been, they're kind of some built-in. Some ways it's guardrails. I mean, it is. So God's been real good, and she's a great teacher. So it's kind of fun. There's a lot of time. Like I was just sitting there going, that's why I said the 3 Fs. It's like, man, because she communicates really well in a fresh way, different than I do. So there's almost always some part of the message I give on Sunday. There's some part, some nugget, something that was not there in my prep until just discussion over a ribeye steak.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, thank you both for being so transparent and open and sharing those perspectives. I know I've been encouraged just sitting here. I keep forgetting I have to keep the conversation going because I'm just like, taking it all in.
No, that's good.
But thank you both for doing that. I know our people are going to be encouraged by this as well. And I want to encourage everybody for both last weekend and next weekend, if you didn't get a chance to be with us last weekend, to make sure you go back and listen to the message if you want even more context and perspective on all that. And then we're still going. We got a few more weeks in this series where we're going to be exploring some other
It's been so good.
Other areas. Yeah. And so make plans to join us at a campus. We got 7 campuses you could jump in the 828. So why not join us this Sunday? It'd be a great opportunity to jump in for worship and for teaching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. As always, you are loved and sent.